The space battle around Earth was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships moved in ways that broke every rule of normal space combat. Commander Sunwoo twisted his cruiser through enemy fire like he was dancing instead of fighting. The Corvin computers tried to predict where he would go next, but they always guessed wrong. The reason was simple but terrifying. Humans did not think like other species when they fought. Other aliens used logic and careful planning in battle. Humans used something much more dangerous. They used instincts that had been shaped by thousands of years of warfare on their home planet. Pilot Haijun flew his fighter straight at a Corvin battleship that was 10 times bigger than his tiny craft. Every alien watching expected him to pull away at the last second. Instead, he flew directly into the enemy weapon ports and fired his missiles from inside their own gun barrels. The battleship exploded from within while Haijun escaped through the blast. On the planet's surface, scientist Young Min was working frantically in his underground laboratory. He was not building new weapons or trying to invent better technology. Instead, he was opening computer files that had been sealed and forgotten for centuries. These files contained something far more valuable than any weapon. They contained human military knowledge. The files held the strategic wisdom of every successful military leader in human history. They contained tactical manuals that had won impossible battles. They held psychological studies of how to break enemy morale and how to inspire troops to fight beyond their limits. All of this knowledge had been stored away when humans decided to become peaceful space travelers. Young Min began transmitting this information to every human ship and base across the galaxy. Suddenly, human commanders who had been losing battles started winning them. They were not getting better weapons or more soldiers. They were getting better ideas about how to use what they already had. Captain Baeum-kyun received a tactical manual that had been written by human generals 2,000 years ago. The strategies seemed ancient and primitive. Then he tried using them against a Corvin fleet and destroyed 12 enemy ships without losing a single human vessel. The manual had taught him how to make the enemy defeat themselves through their own mistakes. The aliens began to realize they were facing something they had never encountered before. Every other species in the galaxy had developed space travel before they perfected warfare. They had expanded peacefully across their star systems and only learned to fight when they met other species. But humans were different. Humans had completely mastered warfare before they ever left their planet. They had spent their entire recorded history fighting wars against each other. They had turned military strategy into a science and combat tactics into an art form. Now all of that knowledge was being used against alien enemies. Admiral Haye-jin continued her broadcast to the galaxy, but now she was not just telling stories. She was teaching lessons. She explained to listening aliens exactly what kind of species they had decided to attack. She began with the most basic concepts of human military thinking. She told them about total war, where entire civilizations mobilize every resource for battle. She explained combined arms tactics, where different types of military units work together to multiply their effectiveness. She described strategic depth, where armies trade space for time and draw enemies into killing zones. The alien crews listening to her broadcast began to understand something horrible. Humans had not just fought wars on their planet. They had spent thousands of years perfecting every aspect of warfare until they knew more about fighting than any other species in the galaxy. Lieutenant Wu Sung led a boarding party onto a damaged Corvin ship. His team moved through the alien corridors like they had done this 1,000 times before. They knew exactly where to place explosives for maximum damage. They predicted every defensive move the aliens made. The Corvin crew could not understand how humans seemed to know their ship better than they did. The reason was that human ancestors had spent centuries learning how to attack fortified positions. They had studied every type of defensive structure and developed techniques to overcome each one. Now those same principles worked perfectly against alien starships. On Earth, historian Na Young worked with the military command to broadcast historical battles to human forces across the galaxy. She showed them the tactics used at Marathon, where 300 Spartans held off thousands of enemies. She transmitted the strategies of medieval castle sieges and modern urban warfare. Each lesson gave human commanders new ideas for fighting their alien enemies. The Corvin Empire tried to study human tactics and develop counters to them, but they faced a terrible problem that no alien military had ever encountered. Humans did not have just one way of fighting. They had developed hundreds of different military traditions over their long history. Just when the Corvins thought they understood human strategy, the humans would switch to completely different tactics from another era of their development. One day they fought like ancient Roman legions using disciplined formations. The next day they fought like Mongol horsemen using speed and mobility. Then they would change again to modern combined arms warfare. Engineer Tae Young made an amazing discovery in the old archives. Humans had not just developed military technology and tactics. They had also developed the psychology of warfare better than anyone else. They understood fear and morale, and the mental aspects of combat in ways that other species had never imagined. This knowledge now flowed to human forces, making them even more effective in battle. Human commanders knew exactly how to break enemy morale with surprise attacks. They understood how to inspire their own troops to fight harder than should be possible. They could predict how alien enemies would react under pressure. The galaxy watched in growing horror as humans demonstrated military capabilities that seemed impossible. They did not just fight to win battles. They fought with a level of determination and creativity that other species had never seen before. Every human soldier carried genetic memories of ancestors who had survived by being better at warfare than anything else on their planet. Fighter pilot. Minjung found herself flying combat maneuvers she had never learned in training. Her hands moved the controls in patterns that came from somewhere deep in her mind. She was using techniques that her ancestors had developed for aerial combat, centuries before space travel was even possible. As more human reinforcements arrived from distant colonies, the tide of battle began to change. But these were not the same humans who had been losing the war for 3 years. These were humans who had remembered their heritage and understood their true nature. They were the children of warriors, and they were coming home to fight. The battle for Earth had been raging for 6 hours, and the galaxy was beginning to understand that something unprecedented was happening. Admiral Hai-Jin changed her strategy from simply fighting to actively teaching every species in known space exactly what humans were capable of when threatened with extinction. Her broadcast now reached alien worlds hundreds of light years away. Millions of beings from dozens of different species listened as she began explaining the fundamental concepts of human warfare. She started with the most basic lesson that would horrify any peaceful civilization. She told them that humans had never fought wars to simply defeat enemies. They had fought wars to completely eliminate threats. She explained the concept of unconditional surrender, where the losing side gave up all power to resist forever. She described how human armies had marched across entire continents to destroy enemy civilizations so thoroughly that they could never fight back. Captain Minho led his boarding party through the corridors of a massive Corvan command ship. The alien crew had locked themselves behind heavy blast doors and were firing through narrow slots. Any normal species would have been stopped by these defenses. But Minho was using tactics that human soldiers had perfected during thousands of years of siege warfare. His team moved in coordinated patterns that confused the alien defenders. They used smoke and noise to hide their real positions while attacking from unexpected directions. Within 20 minutes, they had captured the entire ship using techniques that human armies had developed for taking fortified cities. The Corvan crew could not understand how humans knew exactly where to place explosives to bring down walls. They did not realize that human engineers had spent centuries learning the weak points of every type of defensive structure. This knowledge worked just as well against alien architecture as it had against ancient human castles. On Earth, military historian Dr. Jun Sik worked around the clock to transmit the most effective human battle strategies to forces across the galaxy. He sent them the tactical innovations of great human generals like Hannibal, who crossed the Alps with elephants to attack Rome from behind. He transmitted the strategic concepts of Sun Tzu, who wrote that the greatest victory was winning without fighting. Each historical lesson gave human commanders new ideas for defeating their alien enemies. But more importantly, it reminded them that their species had been studying warfare longer than most alien civilizations had existed. Every human carried the inherited wisdom of the most successful warriors in galactic history. The Corvan Empire called an emergency meeting of their high command. Their generals studied the human broadcast, trying to understand what they were facing. What they discovered filled them with a terror they had never experienced before. Humans were not just naturally good at fighting. They had made fighting into a science. Commander Gitai reviewed reports from the battle and found information that should have been impossible. Human ships with half their weapons destroyed were still winning fights against undamaged Corvan vessels. Human soldiers cut off from supplies were capturing alien positions that should have been impregnable. Human pilots were performing maneuvers that violated basic principles of physics. The explanation was terrifying in its simplicity. Human ancestors had faced so many different types of enemies and combat situations that they had developed solutions for problems other species had never even imagined. Every challenge the Corvans presented had been solved by humans thousands of years ago. Engineer Yunji made a discovery that changed everything anyone thought they knew about human capabilities. She found that human DNA contained genetic markers that activated during extreme stress. These markers unlocked inherited memories of successful survival strategies that had been passed down through countless generations. When humans faced life or death situations, their brains automatically accessed thousands of years of accumulated battle experience. This explained why human soldiers seemed to instinctively know combat techniques they had never been taught. It explained why human commanders could predict enemy moves with impossible accuracy. The news spread panic through alien military forces across the galaxy. They realized that every human was essentially a warrior who carried the genetic memory of their species' most successful fighters. Combat experience that should take decades to develop was built into human biology from birth. Captain Sung Woo demonstrated this terrifying capability during a fleet engagement against overwhelming Corvan forces. When his tactical computers failed, he began commanding his ships using pure instinct. He arranged his formations like ancient human cavalry, charges and attacked in patterns that resembled pack hunting strategies. The alien ships could not adapt to his seemingly random tactics because they were not random at all. They were based on predator strategies that humans had inherited from millions of years of evolution as hunting animals. The Corvans were prey species who had never developed such instincts. Admiral Hyejin continued her galactic broadcast with stories that made alien listeners question everything they thought they knew about warfare. She told them about the siege of Leningrad, where human civilians ate tree bark for 900 days rather than surrender. She described the Battle of Thermopylae, where 300 warriors held off an army of hundreds of thousands. But the most frightening story was about human recovery from defeat. She told about civilizations that had been completely destroyed and then rebuilt themselves stronger than before. She spoke of armies that had lost every battle in a war and then won the final victory through pure determination. The message was clear to every alien species listening. Humans did not just win wars. They treated temporary defeats as learning experiences that made them more dangerous. Even if the Corvans won this battle, they would only be teaching humans how to fight them better next time. Young pilot Dayun found herself flying attack patterns that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her genetic memory. She was using techniques that combined the pack hunting strategies of ancient human ancestors with the tactical knowledge of historical fighter pilots. Her success rate was so high that alien commanders began to think she was using some kind of supernatural power. The truth was far more frightening than supernatural powers. She was using natural human abilities that had been hidden during centuries of peaceful space exploration. Now that humans faced a real threat, those abilities were awakening across the entire species. As the battle continued, alien forces began reporting something that terrified their commanders more than any weapon. Human casualties were not breaking human morale. Instead, they seemed to be making the surviving humans fight harder. This was because humans had learned through countless wars that the best way to honor fallen warriors was to win completely. The galaxy was learning that humans were not just another species with advanced technology. They were a species that had been forged in the fires of constant warfare and shaped by thousands of years of military evolution. The peaceful humans that other species had known were just one face of humanity. Now they were seeing the other face, and it was the face of the most successful predators in galactic history. Captain Dongwu looked out from his ship window at the massive alien fleet surrounding Earth. The enemy ships were so big they blocked out the sun. Their dark metal hulls gleamed with weapons that could destroy entire cities with one shot. For 3 years, the Corvan Empire had been crushing human colonies across the galaxy. Now they had come for the home world. The bridge was quiet except for the soft beeping of computers. Dongwu watched his crew work at their stations. These were good people who had fought bravely in the losing war. Navigation Officer So Min checked the enemy positions for the 100th time. Weapons Chief Kyung-soo counted their remaining missiles. They all knew the numbers were not good. Admiral Hyejin sat in the command chair of the flagship. She was the highest-ranking human military officer still alive. Most of the other admirals had died defending the outer colonies. She had watched the Corvins destroy human worlds one by one. Each time the aliens had grown more confident. Each time humans had seemed weaker. The enemy commander sent a message to all human ships. His voice was deep and rough like grinding metal. He told the humans they had 1 hour to surrender completely. If they gave up now, he would let some of them live as slaves. If they fought, he would kill every human in the galaxy and burn Earth to ash. Hyejin stood up from her chair. She walked to the communication station and opened a channel to broadcast across the entire galaxy. Every alien ship would hear her words. Every human survivor on distant worlds would hear her too. She began to speak in a calm, clear voice. She did not talk about surrender. She did not beg for mercy. Instead, she began telling stories. She told stories about human history that most humans had forgotten during their centuries in space. She spoke about wars that had been fought on Earth long before humans built their first spaceship. The alien crews listened with growing confusion. Why was this human female telling old stories when she should be surrendering? Commander Gite of the Corvin fleet laughed at his officers. He said humans were soft creatures from a peaceful world. They knew nothing about real war. They would die like sheep. But as Hyejin continued speaking, something strange happened. Her voice grew stronger with each word. She began describing battles that made the alien listeners feel uncomfortable. She talked about human wars that lasted for decades. She spoke of cities that burned and rose again. She mentioned armies that fought until every soldier was dead. On the planet below, young engineer So Young watched the broadcast on her screen. She had never heard these stories before. In school, they had taught her that humans were peaceful explorers who had left their violent past behind. Now she was learning that her ancestors had been warriors who conquered their entire planet through warfare. Old soldier Kyung-ho sat in his apartment remembering the history books from his youth. He had read about these ancient battles when he was a student, but that was before humans went to space and met other species. Everyone had agreed it was better to forget about the violent past and focus on being peaceful space travelers. The admiral kept talking about human military history. She mentioned names that sent chills through the alien crews even though they did not understand them. She spoke of Alexander, who conquered most of the known world before he was 30. She told about Napoleon, who built an empire across Europe through pure military genius. She described Genghis Khan, who created the largest empire in human history. The aliens began to look worried. These names meant nothing to them, but the way the humans said them was frightening. There was pride in her voice when she spoke of these ancient warriors. There was respect when she mentioned their victories. It was like she was talking about family members she admired. Captain Minho commanded a small destroyer that was badly damaged from previous battles. His ship had only half its weapons working and holes in the hull that his crew had patched with metal plates. But as he listened to the admiral, something changed in his mind. He began to remember stories his grandfather had told him about their family military history. The first Corvin attack ships began moving toward Earth. Their massive plasma cannons, charged up with energy that glowed bright blue. Each shot could vaporize a human ship completely. The aliens expected the humans to run or hide. Instead, something unexpected happened. Human ships started moving in patterns the Corvin computers could not predict. Pilot Ji-hoon flew his fighter in ways that seemed impossible. He dodged shots that should have killed him by flying like his ancestors had once ridden horses into battle. The alien targeting systems could not lock onto him because humans did not think like other species. Down in the engine room of the flagship, Chief Engineer Tai-jin was doing something no alien would understand. He was not just keeping the engines running, he was pushing them far beyond their safe limits. His ancestors had been people who took incredible risks to win battles. That same willingness to risk everything was now flowing through his blood. The Corvin commander ordered more ships to attack, but he was starting to feel something he had not expected. Fear. These humans were not fighting like the peaceful traders and diplomats he had known for years. They were fighting like something else entirely. Something dangerous. Admiral Hyejin was still broadcasting her history lessons to the galaxy. Now she was talking about human survival stories. She told about people who had lived through ice ages that lasted thousands of years. She spoke of humans who had survived plagues that killed half the population. She described explorers who crossed dangerous oceans in tiny boats just to see what was on the other side. Every word reminded humans across the galaxy that survival was written into their very souls. They were the children of people who had faced impossible odds and won. They carried the genes of ancestors who had never learned how to quit. Now, with nowhere left to run, that ancient fighting spirit was waking up. The battle continued, but something was changing. Human ships that should have been destroyed kept fighting. Human crew members who should have been terrified were laughing as they fought. It was like they had been waiting their whole lives for a real war worthy of their abilities. The galaxy was about to learn a terrible truth. Humans had not grown soft during their centuries in space. They had simply been sleeping. Now they were waking up and remembering who they really were. They were the descendants of the most successful warriors in their planet history, and they were not planning to lose. The defensive battle for Earth suddenly transformed into something the galaxy had never witnessed before. Humans were no longer just fighting to survive. They were fighting to win so completely that no enemy would ever threaten them again. Captain Biom-Su led the first human offensive fleet toward Corvan territory with a strategy that terrified enemy commanders who intercepted his communications. He was not planning to attack military targets first. Instead, he was going to destroy the enemy ability to think clearly and fight effectively. Using psychological warfare techniques that humans had perfected over thousands of years, he began broadcasting messages to Corvan worlds that systematically destroyed their confidence and will to fight. His messages told Corvan civilians exactly how human armies had defeated enemies who outnumbered them 10-1 throughout history. He described in precise detail how humans had turned defensive wars into conquests that lasted for centuries. He explained how human generals had used fear as a weapon more powerful than any gun or bomb. The effect on Corvan military morale was immediate and devastating. Their soldiers began refusing orders because they had been told too many stories about human military capabilities. Their commanders could not develop effective strategies because they were too busy worrying about what impossible tactic the humans might use. Next, Dr. Eunji, working in her research laboratory on Earth, made a discovery that explained everything about human combat effectiveness. She found that human DNA contained genetic markers that were completely unique among all known galactic species. These markers carried inherited memories of warfare going back thousands of generations. When humans faced life-threatening situations, these genetic memories activated automatically. This meant that every human pilot instinctively knew combat maneuvers they had never learned in training. Every human soldier could predict enemy actions with accuracy that seemed supernatural. Every human commander could develop strategies using the accumulated wisdom of their entire species' military history. The news of this discovery spread terror through alien civilizations faster than any weapon could have. They realized that humans were not just individually dangerous fighters. Their entire species had been shaped by warfare for so long that violence and strategic thinking were literally encoded in their genetic structure. Every human child carried the inherited knowledge of history's greatest warriors and strategists sleeping in their DNA. When awakened by real combat, this knowledge turned ordinary humans into military geniuses who could outfight enemies with centuries more experience. Commander Inwu developed new attack strategies based on ancient human siege warfare techniques. His fleets surrounded alien worlds and cut off all supply lines, just like human armies had once surrounded enemy cities on Earth. The aliens could not understand how humans could be so patient and so ruthless at the same time. They did not know that human ancestors had spent years besieging single cities waiting for starvation and disease to break enemy resistance. They had learned that the most effective way to win wars was to make the cost of fighting so high that enemies chose surrender over destruction. Now, these same techniques worked perfectly against entire star systems. The Corvan Empire attempted to negotiate a peace treaty, but they made a fatal mistake that revealed they still did not understand what kind of species they were fighting. They offered terms that would leave humanity weakened and under partial alien control. They thought they could limit human expansion and keep them as a minor power in the galaxy. Admiral Hyejin responded to their peace offer by broadcasting historical examples of how humans had reacted to similar demands throughout their development. She told the story of Rome's response to Carthage, which ended with the complete destruction of their enemy civilization. She described the Mongol response to cities that dared to resist their demands for surrender. She explained the Allied response to fascist demands for appeasement, which resulted in a war that ended only with the complete occupation and rebuilding of enemy nations. The message was perfectly clear to anyone intelligent enough to understand it. Humans did not make peace with enemies who threatened their existence. They eliminated such threats permanently. The galaxy began to understand that this war would not end with a negotiated treaty or territorial compromise. It would end only when humanity decided the threat was completely eliminated, and human history showed that they considered threats eliminated only when former enemies were either dead or so thoroughly defeated that they could never fight again, Captain. Hyunsu led a fleet action that demonstrated the most terrifying aspect of human military capability. When Corvin reinforcements arrived using a battle formation that should have guaranteed victory, he did not try to counter their strategy. Instead, he changed his entire approach 3 times during the same battle. First, he used ancient Greek phalanx tactics to absorb their initial attack. Then he switched to Mongol cavalry strategies using speed and mobility to confuse them. Finally, he employed modern combined arms warfare, coordinating different types of ships like a symphony orchestra. The aliens could not adapt because they had never faced an enemy that could change fighting styles so quickly. Human fleets advanced deeper into alien territory, carrying with them the accumulated military wisdom of their entire species. They were not just soldiers with advanced weapons. They were the inheritors of every successful military tradition that had ever existed on Earth. Each human carried genetic memories of victories won by their ancestors against impossible odds. The most shocking revelation came when anthropologist Junho published his analysis comparing alien warfare to human military history. He discovered that every other species in the galaxy had developed space travel before they perfected warfare. They had expanded peacefully through their star systems and only learned to fight when they encountered other species. But humans had completely mastered the art and science of warfare before they ever left their home planet. This meant that every alien military tradition was thousands of years less advanced than human combat knowledge. When other species fought their first wars, they were learning lessons that humans had already perfected and moved far beyond. Fighter pilot. Yejin demonstrated this advantage during an engagement where she was outnumbered 20-1 by experienced Corvin aces, using tactics that combined the aerial combat knowledge of human fighter pilots with the 3-dimensional thinking of ancient naval commanders. She destroyed 15 enemy ships without taking a single hit. Her success was not luck or superior technology. It was the result of genetic memories that gave her access to thousands of years of human combat experience. She was fighting like a veteran pilot, even though this was only her 3rd real battle, because her DNA carried the skills of every successful human warrior who had ever lived. The Corvin Empire began collapsing not from military defeats but from complete psychological destruction. Their entire civilization had been built on the assumption that they were the most advanced military power in their region of space. Now they discovered that they were fighting a species that had forgotten more about warfare than they had ever learned. Human forces advanced toward the Corvin homeworlds. The aliens realized they faced a choice that no species in galactic history had ever confronted. They could continue fighting and face complete extinction, or they could surrender so completely that they would never be able to threaten anyone again. Either way, their empire was finished and humanity would decide what happened next. 1 year after the war began, Admiral Hyojin stood before the Galactic Council as humanity established itself as the dominant military power in known space. The Great Assembly Hall was filled with representatives from dozens of alien species who listened in complete silence as she explained the terms for lasting peace throughout the galaxy. These were not the harsh demands of conquerors seeking tribute or revenge. Instead, they were the carefully considered terms of a species that understood from thousands of years of experience how to build genuine peace through demonstrated strength and wise leadership. Humanity would not rule the galaxy as emperors or dictators. They would serve as protectors and military advisors, helping other species develop effective defense capabilities while preventing any single power from threatening galactic stability. It was a role that humans were uniquely qualified to fill. Captain Sungmin commanded the first joint fleet that included ships and crews from multiple alien species working under human military leadership. The aliens quickly discovered that humans were not just superior warriors but also exceptional military teachers who could help other species fight more effectively than they ever had, independently. Under human guidance, alien crews learned combat techniques that multiplied their natural abilities. Corvan ships that had once been clumsy and predictable became fast and deadly when their crews learned human tactical principles. Zilani fighters that had been vulnerable to attack became nearly impossible to hit when their pilots adopted human evasive maneuvers. Commander Yejin created battle formations that combined human tactical knowledge with the unique capabilities of different alien species. She arranged Corvan heavy cruisers in defensive positions like ancient human castle walls, while using fast Zilani scouts like cavalry units to strike at enemy flanks. The result was military formations more powerful than anything the galaxy had ever seen. The transformation amazed everyone who witnessed it. Species that had been enemies for centuries now fought side by side in fleets commanded by human officers who understood exactly how to use each alien race's natural strengths. Wars that had lasted for decades ended within months when human advisors taught both sides how to achieve their goals without destroying each other. Dr. Jin Young established the Galactic Military Academy on Earth, where alien officers came to learn human military science. The curriculum included not just tactics and strategy, but also the psychology of warfare, the logistics of long campaigns, and the diplomacy of military alliances. Students learned that the strongest armies were those that never had to fight, because their reputation alone prevented conflicts. The Academy became the most prestigious military institution in the galaxy. Graduates returned to their homeworlds as part of a new generation of alien leaders who understood that true strength came from being so obviously powerful that potential enemies chose cooperation over confrontation. Years passed and the galaxy prospered under human military protection in ways that surprised even the humans themselves. Trade increased dramatically because merchants knew that human patrol fleets kept the space lanes safe from pirates and raiders. Scientific exploration expanded because human military technology made dangerous journeys to unknown systems much safer than before. The most remarkable change was in how different species related to each other. Under human guidance, they learned that military cooperation created bonds stronger than trade agreements or diplomatic treaties. Former enemies became trusted allies when they fought together against common threats under human leadership. Captain Wu Bin commanded a patrol fleet that included ships from 6 different species. His crews had learned to work together so effectively that they could coordinate complex operations without even speaking the same languages. They communicated through shared tactical knowledge that humans had taught them and mutual respect earned through successful missions. The galaxy discovered that humans had not just mastered the art of warfare, but also the more difficult art of building lasting peace. Their ancestors had learned through bitter experience that winning wars was much easier than creating stable societies that could prevent future conflicts. Human military advisors taught alien civilizations how to resolve disputes before they became wars. They showed them how to build defense agreements that protected everyone without threatening anyone. They demonstrated that the best military leaders were those who made warfare unnecessary through superior diplomacy backed by obvious strength. Former Corvan commander Gite now served as a human fleet officer after his complete surrender and re-education. He had learned that his species' greatest mistake was assuming that military power meant the ability to destroy enemies. Under human teaching, he discovered that true military power meant the ability to protect friends and convert enemies into allies. The change in his thinking represented the transformation happening throughout the galaxy. Species that had spent centuries competing for resources and territory now worked together on projects that benefited everyone. They had learned from human example that cooperation was more profitable than conquest. Engineer So Young designed the memorial that was built on Earth to commemorate the war that had changed everything. The monument included names of humans who had died in the fighting, but it also honored alien soldiers who had fought beside humanity in the final battles. This inclusion showed that humans understood the difference between enemies and future friends. The memorial inscription explained the lesson that the galaxy had learned during the war. It read that humanity had not been finished when the aliens attacked, but had just been waiting for enemies worthy of their evolved capabilities. The humans had finally found opponents who could teach them something valuable about the nature of galactic civilization. But the inscription also noted that humanity's greatest victory was not conquering their enemies but converting them into allies who now fought beside them for goals greater than any single species could achieve alone. This transformation from warfare to cooperation represented the highest achievement of human military science. Dr. Yunji published her final research on human genetic combat, memories and their implications for galactic society. She concluded that humans were uniquely suited to serve as military leaders because their inherited knowledge included not just how to win wars, but also how to build the kind of peace that made future wars unnecessary. Her work showed that human ancestors had learned that the most successful military campaigns were those that ended with former enemies becoming loyal allies. This knowledge was now being applied on a galactic scale, with results that exceeded everyone's expectations. The final scene takes place 10 years after the war ended. Captain Dongwu, now an elderly admiral, walks through a space station that serves as headquarters for the Galactic Defense Force. He watches crews from dozens of different species working together under human command to protect trade routes and explore new systems. He remembers the desperate battle for Earth when humanity seemed doomed to extinction. Now he sees the result of that struggle in the form of a galactic civilization that is more peaceful and prosperous than anyone had thought possible. The war that was supposed to destroy humanity had instead awakened their true potential as leaders and protectors. His final log entry summarizes the transformation that had reshaped the galaxy. Humanity had been hiding their military capabilities during centuries of peaceful space travel, not because they were weak, but because they had no enemies worthy of their abilities. When they finally faced a real threat, they revealed themselves as the most advanced military species in known space. But their greatest achievement was not demonstrating their superiority in warfare. It was using that superiority to create a new kind of galactic order, where strength served peace and former enemies became trusted allies. The galaxy had thought humanity was finished, but instead, humanity had finished the age of constant conflict and begun the era of cooperative strength. The human species had found their true purpose in the galaxy, not as conquerors or rulers, but as the guardians who made it possible for all species to prosper together, and that Admiral Dongwu concluded was the most human victory of all, turning a war for survival into a foundation for lasting galactic peace. The war reached a turning point that would reshape how every species in the galaxy understood the nature of conflict and power. Humans demonstrated their most terrifying capability, which was not superior weapons or better technology, but something far more dangerous. They could adapt to any alien technology and use it more effectively than the species that had invented it. Engineer Wu Jin had been studying captured Corvin weapons for only 3 days when he developed improvements that made them twice as effective as the original designs. This was not exceptional genius or advanced human technology. This was the inherited skill of a species that had spent thousands of years perfecting every tool of warfare they had ever encountered. His modifications were based on principles that human weapon makers had learned during centuries of arms development on Earth. He understood how to balance power with accuracy and how to maximize damage while minimizing energy consumption. These were lessons that alien engineers had never needed to learn because their species had not spent millennia in constant warfare. Across the galaxy, alien military commanders watched in growing horror as humans displayed strategic thinking that seemed to violate the basic laws of military science. Commander Hyun Soo launched simultaneous attacks on 12 different Corvin worlds, using tactics that were specifically designed to counter each planet's unique defensive capabilities. Each attack used strategies that the defending species recognized from their own worst historical military defeats. Humans had studied every alien species in the galaxy and learned how to defeat them using methods that exploited their specific weaknesses and psychological vulnerabilities. The most devastating realization came when military analyst Jun Ho published his comparative study of galactic warfare traditions. His research proved that every other species in the galaxy had developed space travel before they had fully developed their understanding of combat and strategy. This meant that alien civilizations had expanded peacefully through their star systems. During their early development, they had built colonies and trade networks without facing serious military challenges. They had only learned to fight when they encountered other species in space and conflicts arose over resources or territory. But humans were completely different. They had perfected the art and science of warfare thousands of years before they built their first spaceship. They had spent their entire recorded history fighting wars against each other with increasing sophistication and deadliness. Every major human civilization had contributed something to their species' understanding of military strategy. The Greeks had developed disciplined infantry tactics. The Romans had created professional armies and military engineering. The Mongols had perfected mobile warfare and psychological operations. The British had mastered naval combat and global logistics. By the time humans reached space, they carried with them the accumulated military wisdom of dozens of warrior cultures that had competed against each other for millennia. No other species in the galaxy had anything comparable to this depth of combat knowledge. Captain Dayun led a fleet action that perfectly demonstrated human tactical flexibility. When enemy reinforcements arrived using a formation that should have guaranteed their victory, she did not panic or retreat. Instead, she adapted her strategy using knowledge that her ancestors had developed. Fighting similar battles thousands of years ago, she recognized that the alien formation was identical to tactics used by ancient human armies during the Battle of Cannae. Her response was to use the counter strategy that had been developed to defeat exactly this type of attack. Within hours, she had turned what should have been a devastating defeat into a complete human victory. The aliens watching this battle could not understand what had happened. Their formation had worked perfectly against every other species they had ever fought. They did not realize that humans had developed and countered this same tactic centuries before other species had even invented gunpowder. The Corvan Empire military command called an emergency session to analyze human combat capabilities. Their best strategic analysts worked around the clock studying every human battle since the war began. What they discovered filled them with a despair that they had never experienced in their long history of conquest. Humans were not just using advanced tactics or superior technology. They were fighting with the combined knowledge of every successful military tradition their species had ever developed. Every human commander had access to strategies that had been tested and refined through thousands of years of actual warfare. More terrifying still was the discovery that humans seemed to have strategic solutions for military problems that other species had never even imagined. They could counter attacks that had never been used against them before because their ancestors had faced similar challenges in different contexts throughout their violent history. The psychological impact on Corvan forces was complete and devastating. Their soldiers began refusing to fight because they believed human victory was inevitable. Their commanders could not develop new strategies because they assumed humans had already developed counters to anything they might attempt. Other alien species sent desperate diplomatic messages to humanity begging for mercy and offering complete surrender. They had realized that humans were not just another advanced species with powerful weapons. They were a species that had been forged by thousands of years of constant warfare and shaped by evolutionary pressure that no other known civilization had experienced. Scientists across the galaxy began studying human development to understand how one species could become so militarily advanced. What they discovered was that Earth had been uniquely suited to producing a warrior species. The planet had multiple continents separated by oceans, which led to the development of numerous competing civilizations. These human civilizations had fought each other continuously for thousands of years. Each group that survived had to become more effective at warfare than their neighbors or face extinction. This created evolutionary pressure that selected for strategic thinking, military innovation, and the ability to adapt quickly to new threats. No other known planet had produced similar conditions. Most species had developed on worlds with single large continents where one civilization eventually dominated peacefully. They had never faced the competitive pressure that had shaped human military capabilities. The revelation that terrified alien leaders most was understanding what this meant for the future of galactic politics. Humans had not revealed their full capabilities during centuries of peaceful contact with other species. They had seemed weak because they had no enemies worthy of their evolved combat skills. Now that they faced a real military threat, their true nature was emerging. They were the products of the most intensive military development in galactic history. They had spent more time perfecting warfare than most alien species had spent developing technology. Fighter pilot Minjung experienced the awakening of her genetic combat memories during a battle where she was completely outnumbered by experienced enemy aces. She found herself using flying techniques that seemed to come from somewhere. Deep in her subconscious mind, she was combining the aerial combat knowledge of human fighter pilots with three-dimensional tactical thinking that her species had developed for naval warfare. Her maneuvers were so effective that enemy pilots began to believe she possessed supernatural abilities. The truth was more frightening than any supernatural power. She was accessing inherited memories that gave her thousands of years of human combat experience. She was fighting with skills that had been passed down through her DNA from every successful warrior in her family lineage. As the war continued, its inevitable conclusion became clear to everyone in the galaxy. Humanity had not just survived the alien attempt to destroy them. They had revealed themselves as the most militarily capable species in known space. The question was no longer whether humans would win, but what they would do with their victory and how they would use their demonstrated superiority to reshape galactic civilization.